Hello and welcome to Ukraine, where we have the honor of being hosted today by the first separate center dedicated to strikes deep inside Russia, mainly with drones. And today we are lucky to have a commander from the 1st Battalion, 1st Battalion, 1st Battalion. Hi, nice to meet you. First, here's my first question. What do you call deep strikes? Because, from the French point of view, 300 kilometers is really very far, so what do you call a deep strike?
If we compare with France, does France consider 300 kilometer to be a deep strike? Well, actually, for us, we already had this 300 kilometer capability in 2022. And by the end of 2022, we were already reaching 500 kilometers. So now, well, you have to understand that both in terms of technology and range, there have been some very significant improvements. Because, as you can imagine, modern warfare, technological warfare, requires constant improvements. And that's why we have no choice but to keep evolving, to keep looking ahead. Because a system that works today might fail completely in 2 or 3 months. And what makes Ukraine strong today, what sets us apart from other countries, for example, if we compare ourselves with our enemy as well,
It's
that Russia is a very bureaucratic, very regulated country, whereas Ukraine is more flexible. And we stay in constant contact with all the manufacturers of these long-range systems. There are many options, so we can choose the one that best fits our needs.
and there are producers.
And when we start working with the producers,
Well,
we give them direct feedback, they listen to us, they improve their system, and this model of possibility is always more effective. As for the damage we've inflicted on the enemy, it depends on the requirements we've given them.
So, do you feel that this rapid cycle of feedback and improvement is one of the keys to Ukrainian success if we compare the methods with what's being done in Europe or, for example, in Russia?
And it's 100% thanks to the very rapid feedback we can provide, and then their ability to react and adapt. Ukraine has a large number of companies that provide different types of systems and weapons, and that is clearly 100% the reason for our success.
If we look back now at the way you achieved such results, what would you identify as your main mistake? And if you had to start from scratch today,
what would you change then?
If we look back, obviously, the first point is that, unfortunately, we can't change it. But of course, we certainly would have acted differently.
Парадигмі, тому що
From that perspective, a single command center should take every aspect of the war into account. FPV tactical drones on the front line,
є там дрони умовно. А,
the front strikes, the middle strikes. And then there would also be the naval side, missile components, and everything related to autonomous systems. And at that point, we could really carry out all the operations that the High Command assigns to us.
Це ті, що нам ставить Генеральний штаб.
and that means you need this whole variety of systems. Exactly. So that means that today you need to carry out complex missions with a lot of very different equipment at the same time in order to be able to accomplish your mission. It's not just a drone going from point A to point B.
Ви все правильно кажете.
So that drones which have a very long range can reach their target. Well, actually, we have to carry out maneuvers to be able to get around the different layers of enemy defense, as well as their electronic warfare, and that's really a matter of tactics. We need different types of drones and systems to succeed in reaching these objectives. But the first objective that comes up is to go from point A to point B. But if it's well prepared, if there's good planning with all the systems we have, then at that point, we'll succeed.
But it needs to be well planned using the available tools.
Earlier, you mentioned electronic warfare. Are the Russians able to prevent you from working, or do you always stay one step ahead?
Are you always a step ahead?
Ні.
Russia is also learning. Just as we make progress, they make progress too. For example, if we look at what Ukraine is doing now to counter the Shahed drones, to counter the missiles, well, if Ukraine had the same level of technology as it has achieved today, Ukraine would be in great difficulty. That's why Ukraine needs to constantly modernize. We adapt our technologies, and that's what the Russians are doing as well. And that's really an important point that I've already mentioned in the past. We really need to always stay at least half a step ahead of our enemy at all times. That way we understand what kind of response Russia will give us, and we constantly adapt both our technologies and our tactics.
I'd also like to talk about the issue of volume, of quantity. Can you give a range for the number of your strikes? We know, for example, that the company Firepoint produces more than 100 very long-range FPV drones every day. Can you estimate the number of very long-range drones you send into Russia each day, or, for example, each week?
So,
Actually, Firepoint is just one drone manufacturer in Ukraine, among others. For example, we could also mention Yuki.
люди, наприклад.
Люди.
Звісно.
So, of course, I couldn't say how many, well, the other drone manufacturers actually produce every day. If Firepoint says they can produce 100 drones a day, that's a very good thing. I know Fairpoint well, they're excellent manufacturers, and you can say that it's a company that's very attentive to user feedback.
But
In any case, I won't tell you the number of drones we actually launch each day, simply because that's a military-level secret.
тому що навіщо відкривати військові тайни?
Hundreds per day, in any case,
Let's put it that way.
or a few hundred.
I can't confirm.
When you have drones at your disposal that can go, for example, 2,000 kilometers, that means the drone will have to take detours to avoid protected areas or air defense systems. And in reality, the actual operational distance for carrying out strikes is shorter than the drone's theoretical range. Isn't that right?
Yes, you have to understand that when we talk about a distance of 2,000 kilometers in reality, it's not a straight line. The actual distance is reduced because of the route and the detours that the drones will have to take before reaching their final target. I wish we had drones with a range of 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers. Absolutely.
I would also like us to talk about the unseen side of the work, the unseen decisions. How do you choose your targets? Did the SBU or that kind of unit assign that directly to you?
Kind of thing. How does it work?
So we're not talking about cooperation with the SBU in Ukraine. Generally speaking, we're more likely to talk about the broader strategic directions set by the General Staff. The General Staff, with its vision, with its high-level strategy, they need to have an overall view of the battlefield with a complete picture. So they are the ones who will directly define the targets. So for us, in the end, it's not the SBU, it's not the GOR, it's not the Foreign Intelligence Services, it's really our General Staff. And if the General Staff decides that we need to coordinate with someone else, for example with the SBU, or representatives from the different services we've already mentioned, so obviously we will all work together, but the main directions are always set by the General Staff.
When you organize a long-range strike with dozens, groups of 50, or even hundreds of drones at the same time, do all these drones have the same mission? Do you send decoys, a wave of explosive drones, a wave of repeaters for communication, a wave for electronic warfare? You can't answer my question. It was a good question. Still,
I understand. Where were you trying to lead me? I want to know how you use decoys, how you use the whole ecosystem. What are the tactics for being effective? But unfortunately, let's say that I won't be able to refute or confirm your assumptions.
and how does someone become a good soldier in your unit? Is it a matter of being a gamer? Do you have to go through special forces training like you? In the past, was there a particular mindset?
Well, come on. I'll put it this way. You don't really need to be a gamer or have a special forces background. But what I can say is that when I look at the members of our unit, and especially those who are part of the first detachment, those who make up the core of this unit, these are people who have accompanied me, who joined this team with me, so most of them are indeed former special forces personnel like me. But really, the most important thing for me is that they must be true patriots of their country, that they truly want to support Ukraine. And they really need to be proactive. They shouldn't just be reactive. For example, in our case, we won't stifle initiative and creativity. On the contrary, if someone is right, if they have an idea that's rational and good, we'll always listen to them and try to put it into practice.
Монтувати. Тому
So, as I said, being a patriot is really the key, but there's also honesty, responsibility, and then intelligence, and overall, really any type of person can fit in.
You know, when we look at all this from France, when we observe your operations, we think, okay, it's easy for those guys. You know, there are guys who are in the trenches who have a really tough life. Do you also face constraints? Are Russians targeting you? Is it very dangerous?
Yes, I'll answer your question in two parts. Of course, those who are in the trenches have a life that is very, very hard.
But
We do this work precisely to improve the lives of those who are fighting on the front lines.
because
When we destroy ammunition depots, refineries, factories that produce explosives, well, by doing that, we reduce the impact the enemy has on those who are holding that front line. And we know it because we ourselves were in the trenches, so we've been through these very difficult stages. That's the first point. The second point, this is for those who think that, well, we're just going to go launch a drone somewhere. Actually, that's not the reality at all because facing us we have Russian missiles, including the Iskander missile. It will be able to reach our launch site in just 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. And even if you hide, for example, in a trench, if you go into a tunnel to hide, that might protect you against an artillery shell. But when you're in an open environment and there's an Iskander coming that's going to drop submunitions, even if it explodes 500 meters away, there are still very few people who will survive. So it's obviously very dangerous, and it's happened to us several times, but at the same time, thank God. You know, here in Ukraine, we have something we call crazy luck, and having this crazy luck is better than any tactics. So, knock on wood and hope for the best. For now, we've been lucky. Yes, and I want to make one small point because I keep saying the guys, but actually I'm not sexist. We have women too, and obviously there aren't many of them, but we really take good care of them. We need them. And so when I say the guys, yes, I mean the fighters who work with us. But to wrap up on the issue of safety, I would like to add that I consider myself to have 2 other birthdays, because I've already been targeted twice by squads, and we avoided them by only 1 minute the first time and 30 seconds the second time. So that gives a good idea of the level of danger we're facing. Then there's a second point, which is that working with these drones requires having a certain set of skills. We have to form a group in which we have teams that are capable of launching a sufficient number of drones into enemy territory. And that involves constant training, not getting any sleep at night because the missions never stop. We work every day, so it's really very hard work. Maybe it gives the impression that it's easy. They just launch drones, but in reality, it's not like that at all. It's really hard work that really needs to be done perfectly.
So that means there are two wars. There's the war on the front line, and then there's the war with strategic value at longer range. And you're trying to force Russia to abandon its objective because of a lack of money, the destruction of their factories, is that right?
Yes, of course, and actually we can sum it up like that.
над діпстрайками це якраз
The main objective of long-range strikes is really to weaken Russia.
садити Росію економічно.
On the economic, logistical, and military level, we've run the numbers and determined that every dollar invested in our long-range war allows us to destroy the equivalent of $256 worth of equipment in Russia.
Right. Is there a particular skill that was really super secret 6 months ago and has now become something completely commonplace today?
Basic knowledge today?
Well, I can tell you a super secret story about what happened at the very beginning of the war and about the development of the armed forces in Ukraine. Because in reality, nobody really believed in drones and the armed forces, and in general, nobody even understood what a drone actually was. It was a series of very lucky coincidences that led the Russians to try to use these drones. Because in fact, they were simply stored in warehouses and we started working with them because we found them, since in reality, these were ultra-secret projects. But as for the secrets that were still relevant 6 months ago, unfortunately, I still can't talk about them, because that would mean I would be explaining to you certain technologies that are still used today. For example, how a drone is built, what kind of detection it will use on the target, how we managed to get around Russian air defense. These are really pieces of information that are still extremely sensitive.
And how do you think countries like France, Western European countries, could come and learn from you? Do they come? Do they try to improve? Are we really far behind you? Actually,
It's a story that continues to be written every day. Everyone understands today that Ukraine has become a kind of testing ground for all other countries. To test equipment, to validate tactics, so of course, friendly countries learn a lot from what we do, but I'll also tell you something more. It's necessary for you to learn from this experience, and I'll give you an example that might be hard to hear, but it's the truth.
For example,
If the countries supporting Ukraine today stopped helping us, and if they said, all right, that's enough now, you're one-on-one with this enemy, And now imagine an apocalyptic scenario in which Russia manages to capture all of Ukraine.
Україну. А тепер
So now imagine if these two armies have been hardened by 5 years of intense war with drone technologies that are far ahead of anything that could be used by any allied country today. What would happen to NATO, to Europe? It's an ethical question, of course.
переведи сам.
Is there something you think that Western European countries, Europe, the United States, don't understand about the reality of the war in Ukraine today?
No matter how long it takes, because in any case, we are the only line of defense. In fact, that's exactly what I was answering in the previous question. It's about truly understanding why European countries, Western countries, are providing aid today. Because we really need to understand that Ukraine is truly the shield of Europe. Our soldiers, the men and women of our armed forces, are paying this price with their health, for their families, with their lives, so that Europe can remain at peace. Because we remember what happened at the beginning of the war, when all the Kremlin spokespersons said that Ukraine would only be the first step. They said it openly. If, for example, instead of attacking Ukraine, they had targeted Latvia or Lithuania, well, the situation would have been very, very different. So our Western partners really need to understand that we need this help. Ukraine, unfortunately, in this wartime situation, cannot rely only on itself. On our side, in a way, you could say we've already squeezed ourselves dry to be able to provide everything necessary to the very limit of our strength to resist this threat.
But yes,
We need help. And more importantly, understanding. Understanding of what kind of help we need. Because these are both financial and military issues. Our friendly countries might say, for example, that they have fighter jets. And yes, that's true. A fighter jet is great when it comes to bombing Iran after its air defense has already been destroyed. So when there's no more air defense in Iran, the planes can fly freely. But even in this situation, they can't really totally unleash all that American power with all the surrounding countries involved. And in the end, the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked and the oil remains blocked. So basically, to be able to fight Russia, it's still much, much more difficult because they really have a lot more people and are much better equipped. Compared to Russia, we might be like a small child, but a child who has learned how to box and knows where to hit to hurt. That's why there really needs to be a very clear understanding of how much support and assistance are necessary for us, no matter how long it will last, because we're the ones holding the line. If we look into the issue of unmanned systems, it actually includes many components, whether we're talking about the tactical level or even up to the strategic level. And since we are at war, we are constantly in a race for technological innovation, because each of our systems must be continuously improved. And we also need major reforms within the Army, and they have started to be implemented, but obviously it's much harder to do when you're already at war. So for me, if I had to change something, the first goal, the main goal, is first to have a professional contract within the Army so that the people who serve in the armed forces are truly motivated. A contract with the Army should include financial and social support for all members serving, because sometimes I can see that some soldiers have salaries that are only 20 to 30,000 hryvnias, which is really very low. How much is that in euros? That's barely 500 euros, right? Let's say 400 to 500 euros in salary for a member of the armed forces. And even if they're not on the battlefield on the front line, but they're working somewhere in logistics or at headquarters, well, it's still a huge workload. Those involved in military operations can receive up to 20,000 hryvnias. So it's good that the soldiers who are in combat units receive pay that matches the risks. But for those who support us with high inflation and high exchange rates, well, it's still a very small amount. Because each of us has families, we have parents, and they also need our support. Of course, the government tries to provide everything that's necessary, but again, it comes back to the question of funding. Because when we look in detail at the financial support we receive from Western countries, as well as training, information, our personnel, yes, also equipment, and then, at another level, we ask our Western partners, well, if they can support us, for example, with vehicles, well, they tell us, but we don't understand. You need vehicles. Isn't the government supposed to provide them for you? So we answer yes, obviously the government should. It's trying to do its best, but unfortunately it's not enough. So in the end, when people outside of Ukraine or Western partners see that there are Ukrainian soldiers who start fundraising for drones, for vehicles, or any other type of equipment, well, they need to understand that this is the reality of war today. Everyone does this because we understand that without this additional support, well, a unit simply won't be able to survive. And by the way, I'd like to present to you our hoodie, which we brought especially for you, and this is actually the new version. You see that it has the logo of our first center, it's perfect, and on the back, that's our slogan.
Наш такий слоган.
In the Special Forces, the slogan was, I'm coming to face you, and ours, of course, is, I'm flying to face you.
Thank you. I have something for you too. You know, we also have a long history when it comes to killing Russians. That's Napoleon III. During the Battle of Sevastopol, we killed 150,000 Russians back then. The Trident with the Eiffel Tower, of course. And the Mirage 2000, I know the Mirage 2000 is a good plane, but you're expecting something even better, but it's part of our patch collection.
We would also like to deploy more Mirages on our side as well.
Okay, I'll say a few words in French. I also want to thank the team who gave me this gift to show appreciation for our efforts. A team took the tail of a Garin and painted Napoleon on it. That's also a good memory. We burned Moscow. That gives us another thing in common between France and Ukraine, doesn't it, you know?
I know that very soon Moscow will start to burn. They'll start whining like little dogs. And I think that moment will come very soon. He also has his new country, right? And in Moscow, for now, they feel like everything is fine, but that's only for now. And that, I can guarantee you.
Friends, I'll put all the links in the comments of this video so you can buy awesome hoodies, matching caps, make donations, and support them. Anyway, today, it's really the kind of system that saves lives, allows them to work safely, and helps bring this war to an end as quickly as possible. So that's also a crucial part of the war effort, international support, and not just support from governments. Your support can also save lives. Thank you again for everything. It was an honor and a real pleasure to be welcomed here. Can I come with you on one of your next missions? Barely.
Us.
Okay, we'll see. Stay tuned. See you soon.